Okay, and then everybody is muted. You can unmute yourselves if you have something uh, constructive to say. Of course, if you have any questions or anything, please, we want to hear from you. Just as the mute all is just for background noise. So I think we'll start now. Okay, so we've been moving along in the Torah portions and the unfolding of our early generations of creation, Adam and Eve, Noah, and then on to Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah both pass away in the Torah portion we read yesterday. The beginning of the Torah portion opens with her death. That's the setting of the entire Torah portion. And then at the end of the Torah portion, we have Abraham passing away too. Now, one of the things that when Abraham was first spoken to by God, Abraham is 75 years old. He and Sarah have, this a couple of weeks ago, we discussed briefly because we were going into only one topic in the Torah portion, but he and Sarah were spiritually sensitive, striving people. They looked at a polytheistic world, a materialism-focused world, and they knew there was something more out there. And a God who's a creator, a loving being who brought everyone into existence for a purpose. And with that, the idea of an infinite being had to be a good being in their minds, and therefore there had to be a love and a care coming from that being to them, which was very alien to the society of that time. So they have been, even though they've had no revelation from God, they've been promoting this idea of monotheism, of a loving God beyond all of the physical and the limited, very finite objects of worship that were popular in the day. And it's only when they turn, when Abraham's 75 and Sarah's in her late 60s, that God finally reveals himself to them, because they've earned it. And when God reveals himself to Abraham and Sarah, God says, leave your land. They're in the Turkey, Iraq area, Syria, and to go to a place I will show you. In other words, I'm not even going to tell you where it is, but you got to trust me. So it's a test of trust in God. And then it's right, really punch off the bat. God says, and I'm going to give the land to the land that I'm showing you to you. I'm going to give it to your descendants. And that crops up from time to time, this idea of he's going to give the land, which is called the land of Canaan at the time. This will be an inheritance for Abraham and Sarah's descendants, which we know today as the Jewish people. Now, for just a little bit of context for that, we're not going to solve any geopolitical questions right now, but in the sitting, but we want to understand the Torah perspective, at least the beginning of the Torah perspective on it, and delve into some of the nuances of the narrative. I want to share a screen here. This is not very sophisticated. It's my attempt at doing something. Okay, so if you can see there's Noah. So Noah he goes through the flood, as we all know. And when once the flood is over, the rest of the world is all Noah's children. And that's why really one of the Jewish titles for our non-Jewish brethren is that they're all children of Noah. Everyone's children of Noah. More specifically, we're children of Abraham and Sarah, which is a later generation. And Noah, the Torah tells us, has 3 sons. The oldest is named Yafet. The second is named Shem, and Abraham comes from Shem. The youngest is named Ham or Ham, the way the Christians will call it. And one of his children is Canaan. So Shem is, when people call us Semites or Semitic, the root of that is that we are descended from Shem. And that's, in fact, the case. But what we're told in our history, and this is found in non-Jewish history also. There's a book of Jubilees, which is not a Jewish book. It's Greek and so on. There's the history as we have it, is that Shem, when Noah, he has the whole world before him, post-flood. He's got 3 kids in their families. He says, you take this neighborhood, you take that neighborhood, you take another neighborhood. They got the whole world. Shem gets the place that we now call Israel. And when Ham got other areas, his son Canaan and his children made war with the children of Shem. This is before Abraham is born. And they seize the area we now call Israel. And they settle it. So the land becomes the land of Canaan. So it's really a Semite land. This is before Abraham is born. And Canaan has taken it through war. And the Canaan is a name. He also has children, descendants. So there are many different tribes of Canaanite tribes. And then one of the tribes itself is called Canaan or Canaan. But when God tells, I'm going to stop the share now. When God tells Abraham that he's going to get the land of Canaan, what God is saying is, I'm going to give the Semites, you as a grandchild of Shem, I'm going to give you back your inheritance. So just as an aside, therefore, the Canaanites were not Semites. They spoke Semitic languages. We have proof of that. But culturally, and talking about descendant-wise, we were all cousins, but they were not Semites. The people who settled the land when later on King David takes it over were not Semites. So God speaks to Abraham a few different times, and he says, I'm going to give you this land of Canaan. I'm giving it back to you. So if you look at the source sheet I sent, I put a few of the verses here. And it says, number 1 is from Genesis. This is actually not the first time God says it to him, but just the one to keep on putting more in. The Lord said to Abraham, raise your eyes and see northward and southward and eastward and westward. It says, look through the whole land. For all the land that you see, I'll give to you and to your seed to eternity. This is going to be your family's possession forever. And I will make your descendants as numerous as the dust of the earth. Okay, so Abraham doesn't even have children yet, and he's old and doesn't know how he's going to have children. But God's saying, I'm going to give you children, and you're going to have a huge family going forward. Rise, walk the land to its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you. So go and through walking also, you're displaying, expressing this idea that it's yours. Then in verse 2, it may sound pretty much similar. It says, on that day, the Lord formed a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your seed, I've given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, which is more than we have in today's Israel. The land of the Canaanites, the Kenizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. They're all, in aggregate, they're all called Canaanite, the Canaanite nation, but then there are a bunch of tribes. One of them has the individual named Canaanite. Now, you'll see that in the first one it says, it says, I give to you and to your seed. I'm giving it to you and to your, I will give it to you and to your descendants. The second one, it says, it doesn't say about him, it says about to your descendants, but I've given it already. And then we come to this week's Torah portion, which begins, Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. Today's in Hebron in Israel is today, it's kind of a hot spot. There's a Jewish presence which needs a lot of protection. There's a strong Chabad presence there, but this is something that has been ours for thousands of years. And the Torah talks about it specifically. Actually, this Shabbos is always a very big Shabbos in Hebron. A lot of people travel there to be there for this very special, when the Torah portion is read about Sarah and Abraham being in Hebron, her being buried there in the cave of the patriarchs and matriarchs, the Machpelah cave, which we can still visit, and we do. So she dies in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and to mourn her. Then the Torah says, Abraham spoke to the sons of Chet, which is actually, it's a Hittite tribe, a Jebusite, but there's going to be a little bit of interchange, Hittite and Jebusite, saying, I'm a stranger and an inhabitant with you. It's kind of a strange language. I'm a stranger and an inhabitant. Give me burial property with you, so I may bury my dead before me. I'm asking you, I need a place for Sarah. Now, our tradition tells us that Adam and Eve are buried in the cave. Abraham knew that. He wanted to be able to bury Sarah and have a place for himself also in that cave of their ancestors, of Adam and Eve. So he comes to them and says, please let me have it. And he buys it from them. I didn't write it all down here, but he buys it. What Rashi tells us, though, is he said, why do you say I'm a stranger and a resident? If you wish, I'll be like a stranger and purchase the land from you, which he ultimately does. Or if not, but if you're not going to sell it to me, I will take the position of a resident and take it from you by God's law. For God said to me, to your descendants, I will give this land. So the way the Rashi, the primary commentator in the Torah, the way he's describing this, as our tradition tells us, Abraham comes to them and says, listen, you guys, you're inhabiting this land. It's under your control. I'd like to buy that cave. I have money with me. He was a wealthy man. If you're not going to sell it to me, I am going to have to just pull my God card and say, this is not, this is in the divine deed department. This is mine. It's for me and for my descendants. So you have no right to it. So here, we're going to get back to this a little bit. There are some questions I want to get back to. I want to move a little bit further than sequentially. It'll make it, I think it'll be a little easier to understand if we come back to some questions here. Meanwhile, let's see how this unfolds in history. First, we have the Talmud tells us, when Abraham came to purchase the Machpelah cave from the sons of Chet, they said to him, we know that God will be giving you and your descendants all these lands. Okay, so he had a kind of a motivated seller. They possessed the land, but they said to him, we know this is ultimately yours. However, we want to a little quid pro quo here. Forge a pact with us that your children will not inherit the city of Yevus, which is Jerusalem, without consent of the Jebusites. So now they come and they're maneuvering this. They say, we're going to give this to you. And actually in the Torah, they say, we'll give it to you for free. But we want you to sign a pact with us. In the future, when we know, however they knew, maybe they were also spiritually connected, that ultimately you're going to go for Jerusalem. And that is a place where our tribe lives, the Jebusites. So we'll give you this, but swear to us that you will not settle Jerusalem without the consent of the Jebusites. This is what the Talmud tells us. Now, a question there is, if God said it's yours, how does Abraham have a right to agree to such? Because he did agree to the oath. How does Abraham have a right to agree that we're not going to take Jerusalem? God said, it's all yours, for you, for your descendants. And yet here it seems like in order to be able to more easily to facilitate the transfer of the deed of the Machpelah cave so he can bury Sarah, he says, okay, so we'll give up on Jerusalem, which is something we'll want to hang in the air for a little bit. But now there's an oath. We abide by our word. If Abraham promised something, we got to live with it. And in fact, in the book of Joshua, when Moses passes away in the desert, the Jews shortly after go into the land of Canaan, and their job is to settle the land. Settle the land which is inhabited by Canaanite tribes. And the book of Joshua is very much about his efforts to take the land and settle it. So in the book of Joshua, it says, as for the Jebusites and the Hittites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, okay, because these guys who spoke to Abraham, they knew what they were talking about.